Let's start. Thanks everyone for joining this webinar. This webinar is part of a series that we're building up at Outvise in collaboration with the FTTH Council MENA. The purpose of these seminars is to give a first view, some thoughts around certain emerging technologies that are, and some of them are consolidated, that are related to fiber and the fiber rollout, and to discuss a little bit some of the key factors that impact those technologies or the business of those technologies, and also have a discussion around the type of talent needed to work around these technologies. In this case, we thought that 5G is a big topic, especially in the region, as you will see. It leverages a lot on the fiber rollout to provide the capacity and the speeds to connect the network. And one of the key challenges here in 5G is to monetize it. There's been a lot of investments in different types of technologies. The technology cycles are pretty short sometimes, and this huge investment that now comes with 5G, the question is there going to be a return for it? And if so, where? Right. So we will try to answer some of these questions in this webinar. And to do that, we're very happy to have with us two experts. Raul Iglesias, he's a principal at Accenture. He's been working with 5G for a few years, but in mobile and telecoms for about 20 years, in technical roles, but also in management and advisory type of roles. He's focusing now to helping building private 5G solutions, mainly focused in Industry 4.0, and discussing 5G strategies, which you will see now during the webinar is quite a relevant thing to discuss about private networks, enterprise solutions, and what kind of strategies should an operator follow. Kelechi Okeleke, he's a director covering the region for social and policies research at GSMA. He's provided some good insights on regulatory aspects and on the rollout of these type of technologies in the region, in Middle East, specifically regions. So he's been looking into things such as mobile economy, digital societies, and producing reports on that. So he will be part of this discussion, contributing to the business aspects, but leading above all the regulatory and the key trends aspects. So myself, I'm José Villensa. I'm founder and CEO of Outvise. Outvise is a business technology platform where we were born in the telecom space, but what we try to do here is through this platform connect thousands of experts that are vetted around different types of technology and telecom functions and knowledge. And those experts are available for any client that needs to directly discuss with an individual that knows a lot about something, or include these individuals in different types of projects. So having said that, let's jump into the webinar. Here's a brief summary of who we are. As I mentioned, Raul, Kelechi, myself. Summary again of what we've been doing. Kelechi, part of GSMA. Raul, part of Accenture currently, myself, part of Outvise. So we selected a few key questions around 5G, being such a hot topic and knowing that there's a lot of investment, a lot of things around it that have to do with regulation, technologies, use cases. So how to monetize this? So one way we will try to answer things such as, how is the Middle East embracing 5G technologies? What are the main challenges that the industry players are facing when monetizing 5G? What do they expect to do when monetizing 5G? Specifically for the enterprise segment, because it's a key segment, what are the needs of this segment and how we can expect this segment to evolve? For the enterprise segment, what are those challenges when you need to build a solution that is based on 5G? And then what can we expect from local regulations to contribute to enhance or push or favor the rollout of 5G and all the economy that it unleashes? So these are key questions, and we'll go question by question. So jumping to the first one, Ken, what's your view around 5G in the region?
Thanks a lot, Yusevi, and hello everyone on the line. So the Middle East and North Africa is quite a diverse market when it comes to 5G, because in this region you have countries who are among global leaders in terms of 5G adoption, but you've also got countries who are yet to begin the 5G journey. We have in front of us, a chart that shows us, the current state of things in the region, and we can see in green are countries that currently have commercial 5G networks available for consumers and businesses, and in blue, are countries that have announced, specific plans to launch 5G within the coming years. Yes, there are 5G activities in other countries that are not shown on the map, but in terms of specific concrete timelines, these are the countries that we have. And one thing that quickly jumps out is that apart from Iran, pretty much every other, Iran and Israel, pretty much every other country in the region, that have launched 5G, are GCC member states. And if we move on to the next slide, we can see here, that GCC member states, are indeed among the global leaders in terms of 5G adoption. So the charts in front of us, shows our forecast at GSMA Intelligence, for 5G adoption for different countries, by 2025. And we can see, that at that time, 5G adoption in GCC, will be just under 50% of total mobile connections, which is a huge number. And you begin to appreciate that when you consider the fact that it's even higher than in Europe. It only lags behind the developed Asia Pacific countries, so the likes of Singapore, Japan, and South Korea, and then the US predominantly in North America, and of course China. So these are the big players, as it were, when it comes to 5G development and adoption. And we can clearly see that countries within the MENA region, specifically the GCC Arab states, are pretty much playing in the big league, as it were, when it comes to 5G. Now, the rest of MENA, 5G is more of a long-term prospect. So it's something that will probably take a few more years before we see other countries, begin to come up to speed. But moving on now, the slide we have in front of us is looking at 5G standalone networks, the state of 5G standalone networks across the entire world. Now, why is this important? Now, a lot of the things we're going to be talking about today, will revolve around monetizing 5G, especially in the enterprise segment, which research after research, have shown that the enterprise segment, present the greatest incremental revenue opportunity, for 5G. Now, to fully realize the potential of 5G in the enterprise segment, 5G standalone networks will be very critical, okay, being that these networks pretty much come, with the features that will help enable a whole lot of innovative solutions, leveraging high capacity, leveraging ultra low latency, leveraging pretty much every other benefits that 5G promises. And so we can see here that around the world, again, in the Middle East, we have GCC countries who are pretty much at the forefront of the deployment of 5G standalone networks. So as at the time we drew up this chart, last month, operators in 3 countries, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, have launched live 5G standalone networks, and operators in the UAE have also announced plans to do that in the coming years. So this is one trend watch, really, you know, and the implication really is for us to know that this could have very significant, you know, very significant impact on the rollout of enterprise solutions, you know, which are built on 5G networks. And if we move on to the next slide. So, you know, every year at the GSMA, we conduct a number of surveys. Okay, so this particular survey is what we call our consumer survey. We also have a network transformation survey and an enterprise survey. But we wanted to, you know, find out, because we're talking today about, you know, monetization of 5G, and wanted to look at it from the consumer perspective. And so we conducted this survey, and MENA countries are involved, you know, in the responses that we have here. And the question, you know, that we asked was, you know, thinking about yourself as a consumer, you know, what are the 5G services that you find most appealing? You know, in other words, what are the 5G services, you know, that you are willing to potentially pay a premium for? Because as we'll probably find out as we go into the discussion, one of the big concerns for operators really is how to monetize 5G, in the sense that, especially on the mobile side of things, not many consumers are willing to pay a premium over 4G. But then what are those new services, you know, that 5G can enable, you know, that consumers, you know, could find appealing and potentially, you know, willing to pay more for, thereby helping operators to monetize the 5G networks. And what we can see here is that 5G FWA stands out. And it's, you know, it's no surprise really, because yes, the pandemic, you know, has taught us the importance of connectivity, high-speed connectivity, especially, you know, to homes. In many countries, you probably have high-speed connectivity in offices, but how about, you know, high-speed connectivity in the home? And so 5G FWA is a top use case. And in the Middle East, we have seen also, you know, that pretty much all the operators that have launched, you know, 5G are putting a whole lot of emphasis on selling the FWA, you know, service. The likes of Zain and STC in Saudi Arabia, you know, have come up to say that 5G FWA, you know, has really attracted a whole lot of interest, you know, among their customers. And we have, you know, highlighted a few points there, you know, as to the importance of 5G FWA and how a successful, you know, what, you know, requirements a successful 5G FWA service, you know, will rely on. And, you know, I'm sure we're going to go into a lot more discussion around some of these particular topics and some of these particular issues. Looking forward to hearing your questions. But for now, I'm going to hand back to you, Sebi. I hope I haven't taken too long to answer that first question.
Thanks, Ken. Yes, good point there. Anybody that wants to ask any question, please write it down in the system. And when we finish the session, which should be in around 20 more minutes, we'll start replying to these questions and trying to answer them as best as possible. Ken, pitch in whenever you like. Raul, pitch in whenever you like. But now we go to the next question. Over to you, Raul. So what are the key challenges that operators face when they try to monetize networks in general, but specifically now 5G?
Well, I mean, just to complement, well, hello everyone, and thanks for having me on. Just to complement Ken, this slide, I mean, aside from any regulatory restriction that might be impeding 5G services deployment, I mean, different countries, as Ken was saying, are at a different phase of awarding spectrum and rolling out commercial networks. But I believe one of the fundamental difficulties operators are facing with 5G is the required change of their business models. Until recently, they've been charging for voice minutes and gigabytes of data, but 5G was designed to serve, let's say, certain use cases. So more focus on machine to machine rather than human-centric communication, let's say, right? So apart from the intrinsic technological challenges, I believe the C-suite executives are scratching their heads on how to monetize per unlocked value delivered rather than fixed tariff per month, let's say. So if we look at retail consumers, as Ken was saying, apart from fixed wireless access, where fiber is not available or is not profitable, it's hard to think that they are willing to pay more for just another G. And just to summarize the 4 challenges that I would say global MNOs are facing, I mean, the ARPU is consistently declining. The subscriber acquisition in mature markets is through the roof. I mean, there is a flat growth in fixed and mobile services, and the NPS indicators are going south, meaning that for the retail, I mean, the connectivity is kind of a commodity, and they can switch to another carrier if they want to.
Great. So in the end, we are looking at the enterprise segment as the segment where you can provide solutions, new business models, and new ways to serve clients. And that's where the big change starts, right? You mentioned the other day when we were talking that best practices don't deliver more than 30% revenues in the enterprise segment, right? So what are we going to do around that? So the next slide or the next section of questions for you would be, okay, so what's the rationale? What do enterprises actually need?
So basically, we've just laid out some of the challenges the operators are facing when deploying 5G networks and the lack of revenues to support such deployment, right? I would add that debt is another key limiting factor, and that is killing the speed at which operators are deploying next generation networks. So yeah, they are highly indebted companies on average. So they obviously try to maximize the bang for the buck invested while they meet the, let's say, the spectrum commitments, right, with the regulator. But this is not necessarily aligned with the 5G early adopter needs, right? So if we all agree on 5G being a technology that shall be monetized through value creation on the use cases it supports, right? With more focus on enterprise and less in retail, it makes sense to me to step back for a second and understand the rationale you were mentioning of enterprises when adopting such solutions, right? So I truly believe if operators understand their needs, they're going to be in a better position to monetize the 5G enabled services. So from my experience, I mean, after engaging with dozens of companies, discussing 5G use cases and particular needs, the whole thing can be boiled down to 2 main drivers for adoption: the expected benefits, and they are productivity boost or cost reduction across the board, the different processes, and unlocking new value streams for customers or suppliers, right? In addition to that, I mean, there are other categories of arguments which may favor private networks in front of macro public approach, let's say. We have the coverage, no blind spots, that's for sure. That's the data sovereignty, the cybersecurity to keep your bytes within the perimeter of your facilities. The TCO obviously is important, but the technological cycles differ from the industrial cycle. So they expect a technology that is future-proof, that is going to be valuable in the future, not just now. And obviously the integration is another key point. Whoever is deploying the solutions require this domain expertise. We are seeing this fusion between the OT and the IT worlds. So that's in a nutshell, I mean, the enterprise rationale on private networks. So it's not just about technology, it's to tackle particular problems or challenges the company have.
And that's what makes it complex, right? Because these are the aspects that you need to take into account, but depending on each situation, each market situation, each use case, the solution is different, right?
Yeah. I mean,
so going back to the next one, then the next slide that you prepared was a little bit the forecast, right? What's expected in terms of value?
Exactly. I mean, as we were saying earlier, we have a stagnant growth and revenues scenario with a technology that from its inception was thought to deal with particular use cases rather than human-centered communication. So to me, a fair question would be if private 5G can truly be a revenue generator for operators. And what we are showing in this slide, I mean, is a forecast from IDC that basically there's a forecast for the private LTE and private 5G. And the graph suggests a notable almost 36% compound annual growth rate through the coming years. So in my view, I believe is a palatable addressable market segment to invest in to compensate for other lines of revenue declining. And I would argue that right now is the best time to go out and explore market strategies and gain exposure to this early stage market, because now the competition is not that fierce and private deployments are not mainstream.
So that's the direct value of these networks, but beyond that, there's a GDP, overall greater value of unleashing new business models to these type of technologies, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. I mean, if we zoom out and we take the macro level, I mean, there are a few studies that basically link the technology adoption with GDP impact. And in my view, GSMA Intelligence, I mean, is doing an outstanding work trying to model this. I mean, it's not an easy task. So basically, the following figures represent the expected impact on GDP by the 5G mid-spectrum band, that's the 3.5 gigahertz. So in the recent study, they cover different global regions, but particularly for the MENA region, projections forecast this 35 basis point contribution to GDP per year by 2030. So if we are living in a world of 4-ish% average GDP figures, it seems an interesting, at least to me, an interesting value proposition for governments and regulators to speed up with policies and incentivize 5G rollout and adoption. Obviously, different countries, as I was saying before, maybe closer to the peak 5G potential, and others will catch up by the end of the decade. But I mean, in any case, I believe it's an interesting figure to have in mind to see the potential value realization derived from this technology.
And also, I found interesting, although it's not super, it doesn't discriminate hugely, but there are a few verticals there that stand out, right? I mean, manufacturing was supposed to be the biggest contributor for that.
It's highly dependent on the region and the economics of each region, but at least from my experience, more focusing in Europe. But manufacturing is leading the way with the private campus deployments, and the same is happening in the US and utilities as well. So obviously, those countries that have the oil patch, I mean, makes total sense to leverage on these 5G technologies to improve their processes. Great.
Okay, so now we move to the next set of discussions, which is what are the challenges that serving the enterprise poses, right? And here I will put the full slide. There you are.
Yeah. I mean, in my view, 5G, as any other emerging technology, has been going through its own technology hype cycle. I mean, if you have this Gartner hype cycle in mind, I would say those who started back in 2018, 2019, they've been going through all this hype cycle, right? So probably I'm talking against my own book, but my daily experience tells me that although 5G can deliver value today, as Ken was saying, it will unleash its full potential as we progress into the next 3GPP releases, probably starting with release 17, where more industrial oriented features will be released. So Again, I mean, different markets are at a different phase, but I believe it's interesting, at least for laggards deploying 5G, to learn the lessons others learn the hard way and saving up millions along the way, right? So as you were suggesting, Jose, before, key point here is to understand that the operators that are doing best from enterprise revenue standpoint are reaching this 30%. And they have the 70% of the revenues accounting for retail. So in a technology that is meant to be monetized mainly via use cases, we need to flip around these figures and start with thinking how we make money out of it, right? So being pragmatic, if we look at this slope of alignment, as Gartner likes to say it, we're starting to see this private LTE upgradable to 5G, the fixed wireless access deployments, 5G campus networks mainly deployed in industry to enable the Industry 4.0. We are seeing joint ventures with systems integrator to accelerate the go-to-market. We are seeing joint ventures with hyperscalers. For instance, we have this Dish Wireless in the US that is deploying on top of Amazon public cloud. So I believe that that's where we are now. And I strongly believe we are in the early innings and would require a change in the business model. So in order to enrich your value proposition, you need to seek for partners that complement yourself and help you be agile in going to market as soon as possible. So I would say that it's nearly impossible to cover the end-to-end 5G value chain by just one player. I mean, it's too expensive, it's not efficient, and it's too slow. So
this is, in my experience, whenever I've discussed with telecom operators, mobile operators around the enterprise segment, the first huge challenge that is still not solved is how to move from the core communication services to solutions and ICT, right? And do consultative sales, system integrations, more complex solutions. And that has always been a struggle to move from those lines and those specific type of products and services that they used to sell into broader solutions in partnership with the likes of Accenture, for example. But now it's even more complex, right? Because with 5G, these are solutions that are not only different one from the other, but they also come with different business model ecosystems, right? So moving to the next slide, we should be able to illustrate a little bit the complexity of a value chain delivering 5G and what needs to be solved.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I agree. I mean, if I had to define 5G industry with just one word, it would be fragmentation. I mean, the incumbents across the value chain are being challenged by a number of new entrants and participants. The reasons behind are diverse. We're transitioning towards the virtualization of the network, where they're coupling the software from the hardware, so less proprietary boxes out there. There is a need of more efficient deployments, and there is a trend towards open standards and interoperability. We can think of, for instance, the Open RAN initiative. We are going higher in spectrum, so network densification, intelligent operation and automation. We are deploying cloud-centric networks, so the continuous design, continuous integration approaches are needed. And obviously, at least from my experience, I believe operators lack most of this expertise to deal with all this tsunami of new things that they need to implement in their network. So in order to deliver, they need to create strong ecosystems to thrive and survive in the next wave of, let's say, telco operators evolution. I mean, as I was saying before, they need to enrich their offering with partners following new, probably B2B2X models. In some cases, they will own the customer. In some others, they will support the delivery. They shall be creating marketplaces, focusing on specific verticals where 5G enabled services make sense today. And this obviously will evolve with time as new features are being released into the network. So the vertical that we are working on today probably won't be the same that we are working in a few years. So all in all, I mean, that's in my view. Just to summarize, and back to you, Josebi, there are no market participants able to deliver end-to-end. Therefore, it's really important to build a strong ecosystem before going to the market.
I mean, as a former management consultant, whenever I see a business with a highly fragmented value chain, it starts you thinking, right? And before operators start thinking how to address these markets and what type of ecosystems they need to build and which place they need to take in this ecosystem to make it a sustainable, profitable effort, there has to be this good understanding of the market that you mentioned, so you can break down the value chain and see, okay, where can I fit? Where can I add the most, and who should I do this with? And, you know, fleet management is not the same as security, and it's not the same as, you know, manufacturing 4.0, right? So every single case is different, and the players out there are different. So in the roles of launching this business, you know, in addition to all the technical and operator roles and salespeople and product managers, there's a lot of strategic thinking around ecosystems, partnerships, and value chains, right? So this is quite unique and challenging for monetizing 5G. Thanks. Ken, the last slide again is a bit of a summary on the regulatory and what regulatory can do to help out. And yeah, you mentioned 4 main areas.
Yes. So, you know, starting from one of the points Raul just mentioned there on spectrum, you know, the business case for 5G anywhere in the world heavily depends on, you know, how easy it is for operators to access the right spectrum and under the right terms and conditions to be able to roll out 5G. And what we have seen, you know, is that GCC countries, narrowing it down to the MENA region now, you know, have been very, very proactive in terms of their approach to 5G spectrum. And unsurprisingly, we think this, you know, has been a main factor in encouraging the kind of investments operators have put into, you know, the 5G networks. Yes, so, you know, 4 areas that now we have identified there all around spectrum. The first one, you know, is a well-designed spectrum roadmap. Okay, and, you know, talking about what we have seen in the region with some regulators, you know, who have made this a key feature of their approach to 5G, you know, and Saudi Arabia, you know, is a very, very good example of such a market, you know. Just to discuss that in a bit more detail. So Saudi Arabia, you know, they have, you know, assigned key mid-band spectrum in the 2.3 gigahertz, 2.6 megahertz, and the 3.5 gigahertz. They did this as far back as 2019, you know, just to keep pace, you know, with the other leaders in this transition to 5G. You know, they've also, you know, assigned low band spectrum in the 700 megahertz and 800 megahertz for 4G rather, but at the same time, you know, have made this technology neutral, so operators can also use this for 5G. Now, when you think about all the, you know, spectrum holdings that operators have in Saudi Arabia, you know, it's more than 1,000 megahertz. And there are not many countries in the world, you know, where this, you know, has happened. And we think, you know, that this policy, you know, has direct benefits not just for operators in the sense that they're able to deploy their networks more efficiently, but also, for consumers, because it means that the right mix of spectrum, can help operators, to deliver the very best services, both in terms of speed and in terms of capacity. So at kind of like a very first step is that need to have a very clear spectrum roadmap, in mind for you to be able to work on your 5G rollout. The next one, is technology and service neutrality. I just mentioned that now, this has been a challenge in some countries where operators, have received spectrum that are tied to specific technologies. That means that they don't have the flexibility to refarm that spectrum, for a better service where it makes sense for them, to do that. So having a technology and service neutral framework is an important, policy to really help the advancement of 5G in particular, but of course, connectivity in general. And then you have the issue of, fair spectrum prices. We've seen situations where for some governments, it's almost like spectrum, the time for spectrum auction, is really an opportunity to, to overturn budget deficits, as it were. However, research after research have shown, that an enabling, spectrum pricing environment is really, really critical for the success of 5G rollout. Again, GCC countries, are doing pretty well in this regard. We have seen examples in the UAE, for example, where no upfront charge, was put in for spectrum, and in return, operators, made a commitment to drive, 5G coverage. And I was just very quickly looking at our data while, Raul was talking, looking at those countries. And by 2025, as a matter of fact, 2022 data shows that in Qatar, for example, 5G coverage is at 99.5% of the population. It's 85% in Saudi Arabia, and it's 95% of the population in the UAE. Now, these are very impressive figures when you compare them to any other country in the world, including, pioneer countries such as the US and South Korea. So it's really, really critical, that, fair prices are put in place, because this is really key to driving investment into 5G networks. As Rahul showed, in his presentation, building our 5G networks is pretty expensive, and so apart from the big question of monetizing the network after you have built it, operators also face another question of how much is it going to cost me to build a network? Okay. And, these policies are critical to helping them answer those questions. And then the final point I had mentioned there, was the need to have a significant amount of new harmonized mobile spectrum. So again, spectrum harmonization has always played a key role in the success of mobile networks, be it 2G, 3G, 4G, and that is exactly going to be the same, for 5G. So having, the right amount of spectrum in the low, mid, and high band, are critical, for operators to be able to make that decision when they have to, do the trade-off between coverage and capacity, okay, depending on the scenario where they're rolling out their network. So these are 4 areas that we have identified. It's all centered around spectrum, because, to be honest, when it comes to network deployment, really, it begins and ends with spectrum. Yes, there are other regulatory issues, that can be enablers or barriers, things like the fiscal policy, around taxation, say, around the importation of network equipment, or even on the end user, okay, and devices. Some of these factors are at play in some countries in the MENA region, but in every situation, it's pretty clear, that the success of the rollout of 5G revolves around the kind of policy governments have in place, okay, for spectrum.
Thanks, Ken. I'm sorry that was the last section because we're a bit squeezed now. We're going to change a little bit our planning. I think we're going to go straight to questions and answers, and the conclusions, we'll just put them back there as a slide. But I think it's important that we try to answer some of these questions. We've got 6 questions. Not all of them are looking into enterprise, but I'll start with the enterprise ones. So Sharif is asking, what is the anticipated role of hyperscalers within 5G deployments? Who would like to give it a shot?
Okay, I can take this one. I mean, that's a really, really good question because, I mean, I haven't figured out yet, but I'm going to share my learnings in the last couple of years. My feeling is that the telcos are evolving into something that probably in 5 years or 10 years time are going to be completely different, right? And I believe hyperscalers are going to be more and more entrenched in the telco domain. I mean, if you think of for instance, the tower cost, I mean, nowadays, nobody is surprised that an operator basically spins off its infrastructure. It's sold to a tower co that is operating this infrastructure and making money out of it. My gut is telling me that probably because of the highly indebted company that the operators are, hyperscalers are in a really good position to be the hosts of the networks of the future. So I'm 100% convinced that they will take a really important role, and especially in those countries where there is industrial spectrum available. And we can see this in the US, for instance, they are front running. Amazon with, for instance, the AWS 5G, they can deliver private 5G to enterprises.
Well, this actually ties into another question that Ruben puts forward, which is how important is the so-called industrial spectrum in the private 5G adoption?
Yeah, I mean, from my view, it's vital. I mean, if we think any vertical where you bring more competition, I mean, basically at the end of the day, you have better innovation and lowering the costs. So we say that the carriers have their own roadmap, and if they don't face any competition, they probably are not fully aligned with early adopters' needs. So when you open up these spectrum chunks and enterprises can opt in to get this spectrum and deploy their own, I mean, it's an incentive to carriers to basically speed up their go-to-market strategies. And just take the US again, or you can take Germany or the UK, where industrial spectrum is available and there is a boom of private network deployments, I mean, across all different sectors.
Yeah, I just want to, if you don't mind, Yusebi, the first question there, on the role of hyperscalers. So, maybe looking at it in the other angle. So the question there is within 5G deployments, but how about, within 5G monetization? Do they have a role to play? I think they do. Many of them already have established relationships, with enterprises, and in some cases even with consumers, through the other services that they provide. And so, by becoming more embedded in the whole 5G ecosystem, there is that opportunity for operators, through the right partnerships, to be able to capture, some value from those established relationships, particularly in the enterprise, segment. Operators have traditionally served the end user. Yes, some of them have got big enterprise customers, but these hyperscalers have, developed years and years, of experience, serving the enterprise segment. So I think, there could be opportunities for operators, through the right partnerships and collaborations to be able to monetize, their 5G services, through these hyperscalers.
Good, thanks. We have 6 more questions. I will try to bundle them a little bit. There's a set of questions that are talking around consumer applications, right? So Alexander, for example, is saying, which consumer cases do you expect the most to be used in the next 5 years? That's one. There's another question around mobile broadband being possibly one of the most key attractive services. We said fixed wireless, right? So so it seems like what they can unleash, ultra high definition movies, mobile gaming, etc. Again, in the consumer space, right? And there's another question around OTT players driving monetization of 5G, 6G going forward. If we can bundle this into the retail space somehow, and try to identify what are the key things that might happen and what's the role of those OTT players?
Okay, I can have a go at some of those questions. So if I start with the one on EMBB, yes, EMBB can help, unleash the potential of some of those services highlighted there. And from the chart that we looked at earlier, where FWA was top of the list, some of those other services are also in the mix. So the thing there, is that many of these services 4G can also support, to a very large extent. And so the challenge for operators really is what extra, will 5G bring to the table, and will that be enough to charge a premium? So if we begin to then go into, the realms of esports, the realms of, live gaming, where low latency becomes really critical, then you're seeing 5G, begin to pull ahead of 4G, as it were. And it's those kinds of services that will then drive that interest, in 5G, beyond what 4G is able to offer. We're already seeing them in many markets. It's just that, they're not yet, at mass market level for it to really make that difference between 5G and 4G. In terms of OTT, if they're going to drive monetization of 5G, 6G, and so on, yes, they will drive monetization. The question, though, is how much of that value will come to operators, okay, as opposed to going to the OTTs themselves. I guess that's the question on everybody's minds. It's been the question on everybody's minds since the days of 3G. So yes, OTTs, we've seen in Europe debates around the mobile industry, trying to get the EU, to make the big tech players and OTTs kind of like bear part of the cost, of the network, 5G network deployments and so on. So those debates are happening. In terms of monetization, yes, but the question really is, who will that value go to? Will it be the OTTs themselves, or is there a way for operators to capture value in the monetization of those services? The jury is still out, on how that's going to play out in the coming years.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, at least over here in Spain, the OTT bundles are a key driver for fiber adoption, for higher speed broadband adoption. Could imagine gaming OTT players coming in and bundling all this with certain services. But yeah, the question is this incremental value for the people that are investing in these networks? Yeah, the question is out there. And lastly, we have, again, I'll bundle three questions around the maturity of 5G in the region, in the MENA region, right? So Suleiman is asking, what's the threshold around 5G maturity? And Laila is in a way saying, when are we going to reach 80% of 5G deployed in the MENA region? So it's similar, right? And then what's the role of fiber in all of this?
Okay, I can take a couple of those. I mean, regarding the expected threshold for 5G maturity, as I was saying during the presentation, I believe 5G can deliver value today. But I mean, as Ken was saying, there are alternative wireless communication technologies that I would say in 95% of the cases, I mean, are more cost efficient. So as the standards evolve into the new releases and the new features that are more specific to certain verticals, I believe the value or the potential value unleashed by 5G is gonna increase. That's my personal take on this. And regarding the optical fiber, it's a must. I mean, if we are asking for down to single-digit millisecond and latency, we require to connect every single element of the network via fiber. And at least from my experience, we are seeing more and more companies outside the telco domain, like utilities or red track operators, that basically they deploy dark fiber during their building of their infrastructure, and they want to participate in the 5G deployment, and they are offering the assets this dark fiber that has real deep capillarity across, I mean, nationwide, and is basically supporting the deployment of these next generation cellular technologies.
Okay, we are running out of time. There's one question there. Mohsen, yes, we will distribute the deck. Ali Mahmoud is asking around the fixed wireless access service that 5G can provide. And is this a risk versus FTTH? So what's the dilemma here, right? Should we build FTTH or should we do FWA? And obviously we come from the FTTH Council, and this is an irrelevant question.
Yeah. So what I would say, to this is that it's not a risk. We published a research paper sometime last year where we looked at the 3 different approaches that operators are taking when it comes to rolling out FWA. And in all cases, what we saw was that one FWA was targeted at areas where fiber is not yet present, or it's not cost effective to deploy. Okay, so it's complementary. In cases where operators have rolled out FWA in areas where fiber is already present, it's usually targeted at a different value proposition, as opposed to completely replacing fiber. So from the end user perspective, no, there is no risk. It's more complementary than anything else. But at the same time, we also have to remember that on the network deployment side of things, fiber is really critical, to achieving the full potential, of 5G. So in a nutshell, no, there is no conflict. It's more of a complementary, situation, and it's just, about the different players, and increasingly we're seeing even mobile operators try to get fiber assets either organically or through partnerships and acquisitions, but the whole idea, is to maximize the potential through synergy.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. Okay, so we hit a couple of minutes ago the 50 minutes mark. I think we can finalize the session. The key takeaways, we'll distribute those. We will not go through them. You've been in the session, so they're more or less obvious. I do want to emphasize the types of thinking one needs to do when tackling the 5G business case, right? There's some roles there that are important, no? Business developers that are able to bring multiple parties together, develop concepts that make sense and are appealing for multiple parties, strategists and business cases that are able to break down this value chain and see exactly which is the role one needs to be taking in partnership with the other players. And once the broader strategy for tackling 5G, the 5G use cases or business models, then yes, we have a myriad of experts around networks, technology architects, not just telecom technology, but obviously IT, because this is a complex ecosystem, again, with a lot of software, network architects, business consultants. So there's a number of roles there that any operator that is tackling this problem needs to consider. And having said that, thank you very much, Raul, for your time. And Ken, thanks a lot for joining this webinar and sharing your knowledge with all of us.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll distribute the deck. And is there a questionnaire now at the end? A survey. So yeah, as you switch off, you'll see a little survey. Please answer it. It helps us a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Usevi.
Thanks. Bye-bye.